Yeah, Yuridu, Yundi, Janine, Waradjarigina, Gandagadi, Barambijidi. Hello, my name's Janine. I'm from the Wiradjuri people of the Murrumbidgee River, southwestern New South Wales. I'd like to acknowledge today that we are meeting here today on the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the East Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders here, past and present, and those to come, for their continued care of the land. I'd also acknowledge that I'm a visitor here on this lands and have had the privilege of living here for the last 8 years, and to also acknowledge that I'm living on stolen lands as well, even as a First Nations person. Would like to acknowledge other First Nations peoples in the audience joining us today, and to thank our audience for coming, thank our yarn bomber, and also to say that I am here today in solidarity with other occupied and stolen lands, and my heart is with Gaza today. Thank you for coming. It gives me great pleasure to be on this panel, but I do have to confess to be moderating this panel, but I do have to confess that I'm also a ring-in for this panel. I was just asked to come and moderate this panel this morning, so, but that's okay. I'm happy to be here and happy to be talking about this collaboration called Woven between Aotearoa and First Nations Australian poets, which was edited, I think, by Annie. No, I don't think. I know, sorry. I just don't like the word edited. I prefer to use, when you're talking about anthologies, I prefer to use the word gathered or curated by the wonderful Anne Marie or Annie Tafiwa. Through the Red Room, through Red Room Poetry. And we have joining us today 4 poets who have contributed to that anthology, along with many others who have also contributed, but we're going to be lucky enough to hear from 4 of them today. So I might just briefly introduce my panel. So here with me on stage is Evelyn Araluen, who is a Bundjalung poet and writer and scholar, currently living here also in Naarm, Melbourne. And joining us on Zoom, we have Anahira Gildia. Anahira is a writer and an activist, and she's worked extensively as a visual and performing artist and writer and teacher, and her work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, and she's been awarded as a finalist in both poetry and short stories, and she won the Hiwa Best Novel Extract in English and the Takai Short Story Competition. In 2016, she published a book of poetry called, I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrongly, Pora Porakai, or To the Lord My God, Weaving via the Dolorosa. And in 22, her long-awaited first full-length collection, Sedition, was published by the collective Takihai. We also have Esa May Ranapiri. Esa May is a poet, person, and thing. This is from the bio who lives on Nekapati, Waiahare. I apologise for my poor pronunciation as well. They are the winner of the Janet Frame Poetry Prize for 2023 and the inaugural Kerry Holm Award. They are the author of the books Ransack and Echidna, and co-editor of the journal Kipu Toi Takap. Sorry about that. Sorry about the language.
You're doing great.
And they have a great love for language and land back and hot chips, and they have very little love for, I have to read this bit, they have very little love for cops, landlords, seafood, and they will write until they're dead. Okay, good to hear. Okay, and then Rayleigh Lancaster, who's also joining us on Zoom this morning, from Meanjin, I believe. And Rayleigh's an award-winning writer and library professional, and her writing crosses over poetry, non-fiction, criticism and playwriting. And Rayleigh hopes to combine their work with a career in the galleries, libraries, archives and museums sector to promote empathy and listening and laughter. And Rayleigh was raised on Awabakal land, and she is descended from the Wiradjuri and Burpai peoples. So that's our panel joining us today, and they are a sample of the many writers that we have in this book. Also, I didn't deliberately sort of introduce Evelyn a bit short there because I thought she can do it for herself. So I might just hand over to Evelyn to give a bit more of an introduction and to speak as our first contributor. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think that kind of covers it. That's, you know, I write, born and raised in Darug country, Burraburrungal Darug country, but I'm a Bundjalung woman and very honoured to be living down here and to be a guest here in Kulin Lands, and just continuing as well to extend that respect and acknowledgement for Boonwurrung, Wurundjeri peoples and all the custodianship and care for country that goes into this place. And also, you know, as people gather outside of this building for the Palestine rally today, extending that solidarity and respect for Palestinians, whether they be in Gaza, Rafah, the West Bank, or here in the diaspora. You know, my heart's with Palestine right now, and I think thinking about those connections between Indigenous peoples, between colonised peoples, and, you know, and the various diasporas of dispersed, oppressed, marginalised communities, you know, it's fitting to be talking about Woven today as we think about the bonds of solidarity that connect us to different people living under colonisation. So, yeah, so that's where my heart and mind is, even if my body's here.
Thanks. I think I'd like to kick off by just reading a little bit of the introduction for the anthology, which is, once again, as I said, is called Woven, and that's a very symbolic name. And having worked on an earlier anthology called Guwayu, which was also produced by Red Room and which brought together a collection of over 34 First Nations poets and over 14 different languages. There's a tremendous skill and importance in bringing these kind of gatherings together. And for how you name them as well. So Guwayu was a Wiradjuri word which means for all times, or still, or yet, or later. And it's also because Wiradjuri people don't say goodbye, it's just going to be see you later. So Guwayu is sort of like a way of saying later and always, which was a really important name to give that collection. And in addition to the poetry in the collection, the process of the gathering and the curating was probably also equally as important. So I wanted to acknowledge Annie's role in that and just read a little bit from the foreword to this anthology, which was written by Auntie Jackie Huggins and Linda Tahia Smith. It says this anthology of intricate and exquisite collaborative pieces has indeed been woven together into a work of art to produce this book. And in their finely structured and crafted words, the authors have defined their own space, while also leaving space for readers to engage and explore and their ideas. So I might start by asking each of our contributors to just speak about their role and their experience in this collaboration. And if that's okay, I might start with our visitors. If it's all right, could I start with Anna Hera?
Kia ora, I te tuatahi ka tuku tēnei mihi ki a koutou katoa kua huhu mai nei. Ātinana, ki ngā tangata e whakarongo ana ki tēnei zui. He uri ahau no Ngāti Tukorehe, ko Anahera Gilday tōku ingoa. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I just want to acknowledge and tautoko the mihi that has gone, that has been said already, to those whose lands this event is taking place on, and also to our solidarity with our Indigenous cousins across the world. Kia ora. So to the question, how was, like for me, collaboration in the process of this collaborative program of weaving these things together was unexpected and incredibly, I think it was incredibly different for every pairing that worked together. But I also think some of the key things that came out of it were that there is an indelible relationship that we have with our Indigenous cousins that is born of all sorts of connections to do with te tai ao, but also connections to do with colonisation, the difficult connections to do with the historical grievances that have come about as a result of colonisation. Certainly, in Aotearoa, that's very prevalent at the moment with our current government. I'm allowed to say that, right? Yeah, kia ora. I think that this process and these kinds of works that have been happening are actually the beginning of an incredibly important movement of Indigenous solidarity across the world, and I think that's really in line with how we are all standing alongside our Palestinian tangata takitaki at this time.
Can I just jump in before we go to someone else? Because you said something there that I'd like to take up. You said it was a great, words to this effect, you said it was a wonderful collaboration, but it was also unexpected. Why unexpected?
Actually, that's a really good question. And for me, a lot of the collaborations that I've been asked to do are housed within a very Western paradigm, and how we approach it and what we do is based on a whole bunch of custom and, we would say, tikanga in Māori, but like ways of doing things that are actually really institutionalized and governed by the gatekeepers in the world of poetry and the world of writing and the world of literature. And so one of the things that struck me really intensely when we began, Evelyn and I began to correspond, was the difficulty of, we share a whole bunch of things that people expect us to share, but we wanted to communicate and find the vulnerabilities that are between us that are not determined by that colonisation picture.
Yes, okay, yeah, that's good, because that's what I was kind of hoping you might talk about, was that kind of comparison, yeah, dangerous colonial comparisons between First Nations people in settler colonies, yeah, and dangerous superficial ones, but not enough really meaningful ones, like this one. Yeah. Thank you. And I think also sticking with the visitors, SMA, would you like to speak to your experience of being part of this anthology?
Kia ora. I'm currently on the lands of Ngāti Wairere, and so I want to acknowledge them, and also I want to acknowledge the people of the land who are where the event is actually taking place. Yeah, that's a sentence. I was really under the impression that Annie wanted me and Rayleigh to be friends. So that was I think that's a was a big part of it. I don't think I'm giving a secret away, but I think it was a really big part of it was like, the book is like a really important taonga treasure object in the world, but I think it was, the main thing was to make these connections between Indigenous people. And well, Rayleigh and I, you know, talk a lot outside of this context, and I don't know. I think someone made this comparison. I'm going to say someone did, so that it's not me. But like writing poetry of someone else is kind of like having sex with them. So it's like really like personal and embarrassing and exposing, but also like really pleasurable. And so I don't know. It was really nice to get to work with Rayleigh, because it was like all those things at once, but it felt safe because we had so much in common, you know. Yeah.
Are you sure you can't remember who made that comparison? Really want to...
Well, I feel like people have... Maybe it was singing together that gets compared. It releases like a similar chemical as yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people have made that comparison.
Yeah.
It's just me.
I think it's quite poignant. It's probably just a lot of people haven't said it before. So yeah, good on you. Rayleigh, thank you.
Yeah. Why do I feel like Emily, your partner, was the one that said it? I feel like it came from somebody that was like very close to like one of the two of us or something. But yeah, yeah, it's been, yeah, just like I think that like that Essa and I, we've got so much in common outside of poetry, outside of being Indigenous, even though that informs everything about us. We just really gelled on so many things. And I think that was really helpful for the process. And I think too, because we had met, because we had started a friendship before the collaboration, that we had built some of that trust already. And so it did feel really seamless to just dive straight into it, which is quite punny because there's lots of water in our poem. And so, yeah, that was just a really, really beautiful experience for me. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll come back to the lots of water thing as well, because I think like I've got a few things to talk about. One of those is water, but first I think we'll go to Evelyn.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to put it out there that I did not have the association of writing poetry with Anahera as a sexy thing. Apart from anything else, I'm sure it is for other people. It just for us that was like I was just like, you know, like I was baby duckling with Anahera, right? Like I imprinted on her and I was just like, yes, okay, you're smarter than I am and you have your shit together. Okay, good. I'm a parasite now. So maybe there's varied forms of collaboration, but that contemplation feels immediately incestuous to me. So there's a real doesn't work, but I respect it for you, Mob. Glad that's a productive, quote unquote productive analogy for use. But yeah, I mean, listen, I've got a broader theory about different structures of production and literary production or artistic and creative production in colonial frameworks that are so much about extraction and so much about commodification and they're not process driven, they're product driven. And that's, I think, the conventional model that, that Indigenous practitioners everywhere have been struggling in various colonies because it's a function of capitalism and it's elite capture and it's all of these mechanisms that seek to constrain all of our capacities into something that can be taken and sold. And I think knowing, you know, and I still knowing from a point of critique about why those structures are and those extractions are bad for mob and why they will never, you know, really work with any of our ways and systems. I can know that intellectually and I can know that culturally, but when it comes to writing, you know, I still have a lot of things to learn and insecurities about my practice. I'm still constantly convinced that somebody's going to work out that I don't know any rules about poetry at all. But what was nice is just speaking with Anahira at the start about, like, well, what poems do you like that come from, you know, it was a nice way of just being involved in a process that couldn't, you know, I loved the idea of something being completely democratic and thinking that we were going to be, you know, completely even practitioners and collaborators in that sense. But I think it's actually natural that Anahira really kind of like did take the lead with that, you know, with that work really in a significant way, because it was recognising, you know, we're on different parts of such a similar story, you know, and we've had different points of, you know, if you read the Water Suite, like there's different points of pain and grief and, you know, not healing as a neat analogy, but healing as that blunt way of just trying to like get through living. And that was something that it felt like Anahira had learnt things that I needed to learn, and I could get a glimpse of those in that process, which was so valuable for me.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I think it was also SMA mentioned not which I think like is greatly underrated outcome of all of this. Like, not just this anthology, but a great underrated outcome of all collaborations that people want from First Nations people. Like extractive is what Evelyn said, and I think that's pretty apt. When I was writing the foreword to Guwayu, I said the anthology was different in a number of ways, and I think this one might be likewise. I said there was 3 differences between this anthology and between Guwayu as a First Nations anthology and this anthology now as a First Nations collaborative anthology. And first is that it speaks from the many countries or nations or places that are underneath a geopolitically federated nation that is imposed on top of them. Second, the collection brings together many voices that may not have been heard before, and many new poems across the length and breadth of, with Guwayu it was 1 continent, with this book it is 2 countries, alongside those of more established, which is what Evelyn talked about, emerging and established poets. And the third, I think, is probably the most important one, is the editing and consultation process that underpins these groundbreaking collections is benchmarked in First Nations and Māori or Indigenous editing around consultation practices with the poets. And so I think that was also these books, and the final one was these books do more than just showcase poetry as an art form. They do showcase poetry as an art form, but they do so much more than just showcasing poetry as an art form. They do a lot of the work that history is meant to do and doesn't do. They do a lot of the work that social commentary is meant to do that doesn't do for us. And it does a lot of the work that publishers otherwise don't do either, unless they're called upon to do these kind of special editions. Because there's a lot of people across both these editions that would not otherwise be there. So they do a lot of extra work, these collections, besides just showcasing poetry as an art form. What I thought I might do now is ask you to read, because I think everyone would like to hear you all read. And so I know that these collaborative pieces, some of them were quite long, so I might ask you all if you'd like to just read a passage or an excerpt from your piece. Choose the piece you like the best.
I'm going to suggest, Anahita, for the sake of the Zoom situation, I'm going to suggest you read an extract. No, you're not happy. Do you want to?
Okay.
She's happy.
Okay.
But shall we read it together?
Yeah.
I'm happy to. Do you reckon there's a delay or we good?
I have no idea. Shall we find out?
I think we'll be all right. Should we read?
Shall we make it so the delay's deliberate?
Yeah, intentional. I love that. Do you want to? Should we read from the first one? Or
Yeah, kapai. Okay, let's read the first one.
yeah, if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd love
Okay.
to. I'd be honoured. Okay. So, a water sweet. Ocean, salt water, white sea.
Mulitani.
Where I'm from, the sand is cold. At night, the shell's empty, grey. Clouds scudding like the iriwaru, the spirit voices on the shore.
Tender salt, gentle rush of foam. No explorer can hold enough breath for where I'm from, fathoms and fathoms deep.
I have heard, I have danced, narrative after narrative.
Have heard it sung, have done the singing. Our shadows are nuclear, our gods can swim.
Never turn your back on the ocean. I hear this every time I have salt water up my nose, down the back of my throat, making me cough. Every time I have sand in my togs, my socks. Every time I place the smallest of cat eyes in my pocket and whisper a karakia, I hear my mother.
Hear fear, not as tremor, but as the roar of a wave. Never turn your back to things that swallow, sea, midden, archive, men, or the women they hollow.
Matariki is an internal time, when the bounty for the year is told by the brightness and sureness of the sky siblings. When those who have passed in the year are gone, in the year gone are swept up by the great waka, who are wheturangitia made stars. It is cold, time for gatherings by fires and sharing stories. The time that the sun shacks up with his winter wife, Hini Takurua. Hini Raumati is the summer one. This is an arrangement the women had. Half a year off is genius and sustainable.
Now is the time for Garawa to remind the sea of the song that made it. It's time for us to sing shore to shore.
In the summer of my always childhood, the beach's hot sand on fire during the day. We went to collect shellfish with our toes or check nets. We didn't go to lie down on towels, nor cover ourselves in coconut. I sent messages across the ocean stuffed into Coke bottles. I wrote, I'm being held captive in a concrete tower in Foxton. Send help immediately. Aotearoa, 1989. Because I believed in story. I believed someone might get them.
I did, and I wept for you.
Those at Tangi speak often of the tides. To the waves that come when my son died, we wrote, go. The evening tide is for you, the morning tide is for me. The Tungai a precipice.
There's only so much we can carry, only so much before we sink. The sea has been taken from us before, and it remembers the pain of spilling across dry earth, the wake of the waters that bleed on the stone, the song scraping ashen heels across dust and salt, the story it had to carry for our own end. It remembers and will not forget.
Two friends tried to die by sea. Neither succeeded, one because of the luck of a passerby, One, because your body refused to stay down no matter the intoxicant.
Only so much, and never enough.
When I was alone and contemplating death, its expanse, a constant scream, I used to go to the shoreline, take stance, and bait the ocean.
Come for me.
Come for me, I say. And so.
I heard you. Did you hear me sing back?
This is the sadness our mothers must have felt. Sadness that likes to dress as resentment. Grief. The waters of the earth speaking to us by the moon.
That was special. Thank you. SMA and Rayleigh, would you like to read something, however you'd like to organise it between you or separately? What would you like to do?
We're gonna read together, but
Yep.
we have like a stanza each kind of thing.
Yep.
And I'll just give the title of the poem, and then Rayleigh will start.
Mandanguru, thanks.
A poem in which two indigiqueer hotties definitely do not overshare about anything, featuring big fish, big birds, and revolutionary violence.
My forever mood is horny sad. Chasing any hit of dopamine, I am deadly in every sense of the word, especially to myself. Venus married to forge and fire, wanting to burn hotter still, burn until her magma oceans boil, until she becomes uninhabitable. Unlike Frank O'Hara, I prefer art over real life men. Give me a Botticelli and I will get myself to orgasm just so I can cry after. Give me some of that oxytocin, maybe then I'll parse love like a familiar tongue. I cannot understand joy without a little pain, or a lot, maybe a sprinkle on my cornflakes as a treat.
Just coming into the toilet bowl, writing hormones that fluctuate in amount but not enough to disappear whatever it is that comes out. Is everyone else coming out to their families at the same time in the same way? It's always so fucking repetitious. My uncle staring at me all Christmas Day and not saying a word because the boy he thought he knew I had taken out the back and shot in the head, or maybe he couldn't control his thoughts seeing me in a dress, always commenting on the ways I would learn to appreciate my cousins' bodies, but the joke's on him. My first sexual experience was with my brother, and it fucking sucked. But I'm still way into people touching my ass. I want my love across the sea to fly back to me and finger my prostate. All nails can be lesbian nails if you try hard enough. And once I'm done, she can leave me with a fuckadoki I don't understand, or whole beautiful sentences in a language my ancestors had beaten out of them, and I have not regained.
I emphasize the first syllable, twist my tongue around a pointed vowel my grandmother would have spoken centuries ago. The words taste as foreign as her touch, as empty as my father's gaze, our eyes echoing the sunlight that filters through the tree line, hints of gold in earthy brown. I wonder how I'll communicate with my ancestors when I follow them into the dreaming. I wonder if my dictionaries will survive the trip. I stutter in my native languages just as much as I stutter in English. I hear my speech therapist tell me to speak slower, speak in a wispy voice that makes me sound sweet and demure. But I haven't been either since before I could talk. If I had a coin for every time a boomer asked if I'd seen the King's Speech, I'd have enough money to buy my land back. As if a movie is enough to make me fluent, as if every millennial with daddy issues doesn't have Colin Firth's entire fucking filmography memorized.
I want to scream at my father for making shit difficult, but the gaps he left in my life are maybe holes made for me to fill with something worth fighting for. Like when I put the popcorn in our too small microwave and I managed to avoid burning even one kernel. Hell fucking yeah. I repeat until I fall asleep. Hell fucking yeah. Hell fucking yeah. Hell.
It's all fun and games until the group chat goes quiet and you're left alone in the dark expanse of your living room, having forgotten what living actually looks like. One hand hovering over the blue light hellscape, anticipating another notification you're never going to receive. The other down your top, cupping your left hip, pretending it's the warm embrace of the lover you forgot to call back for the third time this week. It'll be funny in the morning when dawn bathes regret in a pink, yellow glow, and you're made to exist as other adults do in the liminal space between two breaths. It'll be funny in the morning when you remember what laughter tastes like, pop rocks against the roof of your mouth, an ice cube melting on her scarlet tongue. It'll be funny in the morning when you roll into the cold expanse beside yourself, half awake, one hand still fondling a breast.
An absent finger checking to see how much they've grown, these itty bitties. Estrogen is stored in the balls and in the patch at my side. My partner laughs at me going through puberty 2.0 at the age of fucking 30. I am later than most and far earlier than others. Think of one of my closest friends, Koro or Kui, could only start wearing dresses when their wife died. I used to be so scared that everyone I loved would leave me as I grew into my sweet Baphomet transition goals, broad shoulders and tits of the devil. Where do I get the horns, the wings, the hooves from? Black Phillip asking in his most satanic voice, wouldst thou like to live deliciously? How delicious do I think my life deserves to be? How delicious can we make it in this space in between boiling sky and bleeding earth? Two bodies that miss fucking each other so much, they are responsible for everything.
You.
Thanks to all those the poets who shared then. A few things came up when I was listening to people talk. Water, water comes up a lot in these poems, and I think water's an interesting space because it's a soft space and a hard space, and it is actually what separates all the settler colonies that were colonised by, invaded by England, I guess. So water separates Australia and Aotearoa and Australia and Turtle Island, and I'm always just interested in that space. There's both like a hard and a soft space because water can be soft or deadly, or it's life-giving, but it's also detrimental. And I was interested in the water themes that came out a lot in these books, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. But the other thing that I was also of interest to me is a lot, First Nations people, colonised people are the most researched people and have the most said about them. And there's many, 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 many colonial comparisons between Aotearoa and Australia, but mostly by colonists. But I want to ask all of you, as poets who've collaborated across these, what do you think? What do you think are the issues that are really in common? Forget about what the colonialists say and what the theorists say. What do you think are the real uniting points and the real things that, as peoples in these settler colonies, should concern us and drive us? And what are the concerns about your writings? Start with Evelyn, maybe.
one of the things that we discussed as we were, Anahira and I discussed as we were in the process of working out, you know, what this would be, what it might be, is we did discuss water a lot, and I'm not sure if that was an intentional kind of like thematic logic. It was something that we both, you know, it's an obvious place that the mind goes to when we think about what's between us, not necessarily what separates us, but what's between us, you know, and it's salt water, and then the rivers that come into the land as well, and we, you know, there's a sort of a sectioning logic that I can't speak to all of it, because there is, you know, the way that Anahira was describing deep water especially was something really, you know, I resonated so much with what she was describing there. And it's not, you know, that's you know, I'm not even sure that's specifically like a Māori tradition or your people, you know, your nation specifically, but it was something I was thinking about a lot in terms of how water, my concern about water, as a writer now, and as a person now, you know, a couple of years ago, I was in Walgett, and looking at these beautiful, you know, these gorgeous, huge trees with these ancient root structures that would, you know, that were reaching down into the soil, being completely bared and exposed to this, you know, and you don't get a harsher sun than in Walgett. That sun will strip everything from the land. But you know, the crimes against humanity and country and land that have been committed by major corporations, by governments, by, you know, stripping all this water from the aquifers, Murray-Darling Basin, pollution, fracking, you know, the strongest people I've ever met were out there, you know, knitting themselves onto bulldozers to try and save their river systems. You know, Bayami's Nunu in the Brewarrina is one of the most ancient man-built. And, you know, we don't believe it was built by man. We believe it was built, you know, by the spirits of that place. But seeing that, you know, seeing the waste that these ancient, deeply, you know, these are places that have lived through ice ages, you know, and continue to nourish their people through ice ages, and yet, you know, global corporations are allowed to strip and drain and poison these, you know, these ancient water systems that nourish everyone. You know, and I think it's important, you know, we must begin with talking about land back as Indigenous people, because it's that sustainability and that knowledge of sustainability that has, you know, kept those places healthy through apocalypse. You know, this isn't the first apocalypse that we're going through now. But land back must also be power back and agency and control over that land. And we have political struggles, we definitely do. But all of our political struggles come back to, they took us off our land, they took our land away from us, and they didn't let us look after it, and they didn't know how to do it, and they weren't interested in looking after it. They wanted to extract, and they wanted commodification, and we have to be constantly opposed to capitalism, because it will never, ever put the water back.
Yeah, I'm a freshwater person, and yeah, the rivers are our archives. Yeah, the world of water in Australia is post-truth, possibly in the world as well, but as the driest continent, the world of water here is post-truth. And I've written a lot about it in my last collection as well, you know, like treat every river like it might be your last river, because it might be. But the water, yeah, I was really trying to get to that water connection, because water does actually unite. Water divides, but also unites, you know. It's really that interesting space. But yeah, perhaps we will go to SMA and then Anahira to hear a bit. What do you think are the big concerns across the water for all of us? Or what do you think unites us?
I think, yeah, like this kind of collaboration or thing that creates connection is like an incredibly important one. Um, there's something that the scholar Alistair Plummer Somerville talks about is the ways in which we often forced to talk to government, have conversations with government constantly, rather than talking to other communities or connections that we can make. And I think that this book is like a really good example
That's why this book
of,
is so
talking
good.
across our communities rather than, having to put all our time into dealing with the governments that oppress us. But I also agree that, land back is like central to everything. Everything comes from the land, and we will go back to the land. So that's just really important. One thing that was, I think Rayleigh and I both kind of explored was like relationship to water and our palm. Not so much in the bit we read. There was definitely liquids in the bit we read, but not necessarily water. And my last name, Ranapuri, or Ransfield, as it is often written, comes from the last name of a whaler who arrived in Otaki. And there aren't really whales there anymore because they were all killed, and then those men had to find other ways to sustain themselves, which is also through extraction. Marrying Māori women and getting land that way as well. So there's this kind of, I think, this constant struggle with, the lineages we carry, I think, because, there's like we've been colonized. And so there's a whole lot of places that we come from which might be uncomfortable to deal with that are still a part of us as well. But yeah.
Thank you.
Land back always.
No, thanks. And you also touched on entanglement too, because that runs really deep, because we were invaded, but we're also tangled up with invaders. Thanks. Anahira.
Kia ora, kia ora. Thank you for that. Those whakaaro, those thoughts, they're awesome. And actually the provocation's really interesting, because Evelyn and I talked a lot about the water, and also, similarly to bring the incredible Alistair Punga Somerville into the kōrero again. One of the things that she has said, she's an incredible Māori poet and scholar, and she said that, one of the things we need to remember is that the water between us, that is the mainland, the islands in the middle. In a way, they are not the main sort of land in which we operate as Pacific peoples. We operate in the water is the connection between us all. The water is the land in that sense, if you can flip those things. And so I was thinking about that a lot when Evelyn and I were writing and talking about our relationship to the land. I was thinking about it definitely as the thing we have that unites us, and that we will always have that as joined, rather than something that in any way has any kind of separation. In fact, the opposite. And I just wanted to, while I've got the floor, just mention that working with Evelyn was incredible. And in Te Ao Māori, we don't really talk about. Definitely there's an intergenerational relationship between Evelyn and I, because even though I look so young, I'm definitely very old. And so it was a really great conversation, and a really personal conversation. But when we talk about, people will talk about emerging and established writers and things like that, and I really want to encourage people to get rid of those terms.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
But there's no such thing.
Totally.
And in Te Ao Māori, tuakana taina is really the relationship we're talking about, and that's not to do with age, even though that often plays a role, but it is a reciprocal relationship between generations. And I learned so much incredible information, ways of thinking and processing from my work with Evelyn. And so I just wanted to add that in, like it's a really important factor. There's not a hierarchy of knowledge in Te Ao Māori in that same way. And I feel like those kind of constructs of emerging and established come from a really deeply colonial place. And so I just wanted to, just pull that out of there. But, like the big concerns that we have, that we share, these are the things that I was surprised by. Obviously, we have concerns about the environment, te whaiao, the climate. We have concerns about Indigenous relationships. We have concerns about all of those things. But the thing that I think blew me away was the deeply personal similarities in just our life, in our daily life, and in what we have to cope with on a daily level, and in the kinds of exchanges we have to constantly be navigating, and all of those things. And so it was those, for me, that we put into the water to sort of, swim back and forth between us.
Yeah, that's because the research, you hit on so many things there. Like whenever we are researched, they're not interested in the micro stories of what is really, and that is what colonisation is, and that's what activism is too. Like, it's good to see public activism, but most effective activism happens on a micro level and behind closed doors, which is, what is. And also the other thing you hit on that was so good there was around the hierarchies that publishers create, emerging, established, and they are so ageist as well. And in expectation too. Rayleigh.
Yeah, I'm just going off of Anna Hira's point. I got to spend some time in Aotearoa last month with these two gorgeous people on the screen with me. And some of the conversations that a lot of people were having was about water as water as a highway, and how we need to activate those highways. And so that's something that I realized that I've been trying to do, but it wasn't until I spent time in Aotearoa that I actually got to put some words to that stuff. And I think too that speaks to the bigger the bigger conversation, in that we are currently living in a digital age, in a age of information, but also misinformation. And so I feel like projects like this, where we are like speaking together, speaking to a global conversation, speaking genuinely from the heart, from the soul, from country. I think all of that is just incredibly important, and just that is what I love about this this collection, because there are Sami poets, there are First Nations and Canadian poets. There are poets from everywhere, and that is just a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, and I think only poetry would do that. Like, you would not get that kind of thing in a more conventional research publication or project or anything. We just got the 5-minute warning, and that was probably about 2 minutes ago. So I'm just going to ask, would anyone like to have the last word?
buy the book.
On anything.
Kia ora. Well, I would like to just tuku this mihi to you all. I wouldn't like to have the last word. I was thinking I would like to ask Evelyn to potentially have the last word since she is there on country.
Okay. There's lots of thoughts. There's lots of thoughts swimming around. A lot of it is still fixating on the poetry as sex analogy. That's not getting out of my head. But I do, something I really want to emphasise, and Alistair Punga Somerville's name was brought up, and she has done really incredible research on anthologies, and particularly in the Pacific, a lot of Alice's research is on the formal technical term, these trans-Indigenous connections and collaborations between different nations. And she's got a really beautiful book called Once We're Pacific, which was about, historicising and understanding these... I started calling them Waka dreamings. I don't know why. I don't think she used that term, but to me that was the combination of these seafaring journeys of, different nations and peoples and communities in the Pacific, and how, and Aotearoa being a home, but there being other homes. And I remember learning so much from all of her writing about that, that I found really inspiring, especially given that those are shared waters that come to our coasts, and those are shared songlines and movements and migration movements of living things. And I think one of the most important things really that comes out of the process of an anthology is a collaborative work. And her research has shown that there's a very rich history of anthologies in the Pacific. Often actually some of the first publications of many writers will be in an anthology, and I think the work of that, especially in culturally and linguistically diverse communities, especially in Indigenous communities, usually is a result of community labour before it's the result of a publisher or, even an editor. And those connections reveal such rich traditions of solidarity and care. And I guess, yes, of course, buy the book and read the book, and also the other book in this series, Gawayu, and look at the different dialogues and correspondences between different Indigenous peoples and languages, understanding that diversity, because understanding that diversity allows us to understand that individuality is very much a Western myth, and the emphasis on the individual is designed to alienate us from each other, because we're stronger when we are with each other. And that's something I think an anthology does in a really powerful and beautiful way. A book is a foreign object. Stories aren't, of course, but a book is, a book is a product of a system that arrived here. But making that book, so lateral and dialogic and community-driven is, I think, the closest way we can get a book to be for us, by us, about us.
Yeah, and I think, anthologies really work in terms of First Nations cultural protocol and, across all the waters. And Australia could get better at anthologies. But can we say thank you, please, to our visitors and our poets at home. Thanks.
And thank you to Annie Janine.